Shalom, can you hear me? All right, good. I'm just waiting for everybody to start coming, I guess. We'll start. How's the weather out there? Breaking up a little bit, I guess. Yeah, I can hear you a little bit. It's like I can't really hear you so well. I can hear you, but like I mean, it's not like it's not clear. Whatever, whatever. You can hear me fine, right? Yeah, okay, so all right. So let's start to get things going. All righty. Okay, so let me ask you, did Shalom Shalom, how are you?
Oh, shalom, doing well. Doing well. How
Man,
about yourself? Keep going by.
it's, so far so good. You know, we got a few more hours before the sun goes down. So wait, let me ask you this. So you didn't catch the share earlier today, right?
No, I didn't.
Okay, good, good, good. Because there's a few things I want to say that came out earlier, and I want to bring them back. So I don't want to say the same. Okay, perfect. Okay, so it's cool. Okay, so okay, so we're gonna continue on, and you know, this whole concept that we've been in for like since Pesach, but really, you know, first it started intensely during Purim, which is this idea of creating a vessel during Purim, during the month of Adar, and that vessel that, oh, one second. Shalom, shalom. Oh, what's up, man? What's up? Oh, Moshe's here. Okay, cool, good, very nice. All right, so this concept of creating a vessel, right? In enduring hold on a second. Yeah, in enduring and so during the month of Adar, we created this kind of like supernatural vessel that allowed us to enter into this month of Nisan. And in this month of Nisan, there was such a powerful koach from Shemayim, from the heavens, that came down into this world during the 14th and 15th, that we received this infusion of light. And this infusion of light is so great that, you know, as many of the Kabbalists describe, it was like almost like a free meal, right? Like when the Jewish people received this awesome light that transformed reality, that transformed themselves, they received it when they were in Egypt, right? And they weren't holding very high, but they did what they understood Hashem to do, which was, you know, slaughtering the lamb and putting the blood on the doorpost. But this that just those actions alone, you know, maybe other things, or maybe other people could say other things happen, but those main essential, you know, from the frame of Derisa, those things that happened were enough to give them some fusion of light that allowed them to like blast off into, you know, this supernatural reality where they were able to change the way the world perceived themselves. Because before this time, you know, there was no idea that a person from a lower class type system, or a slave class system, not saying they were slaves, there's machlokas about it, I know, but the point is saying that class system, for them to jump from there to becoming the leaders of the world, right? That light is what was received during Pesach Hag Matzot. And so this is the light that we received on Pesach 2025. And we built a vessel during Purim. And so now these weeks of the Omer, we're in this frame of downloading, this super light, this super light that we received on Pesach. Every week we download an aspect. Every day we download an aspect of that to get more clarity about what we received, right? Because on Pesach, they received a completely new vision, right? A new vision for themselves, a new vision for the world, a mission, this sense of confidence. And so for us, we receive the same thing. Now, in the same way that the Jewish people received this light, but they went through a process before they reached Mount Sinai, the same thing is by us in 2025. So every week we have the counting of the Omer to give us that ability to connect, to this aspect of every day we receive a portion of clarity. And so now we're in the week of Yesod, right? And we're in this frame of Yesod, which is this place of foundation, right? Where all the lights, the Hesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, those weeks of light, we're now starting to accumulate, and we should start to have more and more clarity about, what we're supposed to do going forward. And that's really the connection to Shavuot, right? Is this connection to, Matan Torah. And what was Matan Torah? Number one, Matan Torah was the realization that the whole physical reality that we live in is a process of a structure that requires instructions, right? That this structure that we live in, this divine reality that we live in, it requires us to have instructions. And so from there, the Jewish people, became in the frame in a legal binding relationship with the Creator in terms of how to express themselves in His creation, right? How to express themselves with themselves, how to express themselves with the Creator, how to express themselves with their fellow man, how to express themselves with their how to express themselves with their wives, children, the whole thing, right? And so that's like the process that we're in right now. We're in that process of discovery about our mission, right? Because we have Matan Torah, right? We have the Torah, we have the sages, right? So the question now in this generation, what is my mission in this generation? What is my mission at this time in history? What's my mission as it relates to the world that is there? And so that clarity is what we're going through right now, right? So a couple points I want to touch on. 3 points. One, obviously, I want to continue the learning of the Tanya, but I do want to bring a couple of other ideas, right? So one idea is, this idea of like this idea of prophecy, or this idea of Haruch Kodesh, right? And really like kind of like understanding it, right? And understanding, this idea of being able to, achieve a certain level of divine inspiration. Rabbi Chaim Vital and Shari Kedusha, he talks about this, right? He talks about, that's what he's teaching, how to obtain these things, right? The Ramchal, in Path of the Just, right? He's talking about obtaining the qualities of character that will allow you to obtain the very things that Rabbi Chaim Vital is saying that, us humans, as Jews, we have the ability, to connect to. So, with that being said, I look back, on just myself growing up, and you start making connections and different things, and I think about, like, it's an idea that I don't know it inside, right? So I don't have an exact source on it, and but the concept for sure existed, but the exact numbers and this and that, whatever, if I don't see something inside, I mean, unless I hear it from, like, I know who that person is, and I know, like, how they got to that conclusion, I don't really, say over, so much. But in this regard, I heard years ago that from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu to from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu to the destruction of the Second Temple, that there was 3 million prophets sent to the Jewish people, right? And different people at different levels, right? Like not like, everyone wasn't Isaiah, everyone wasn't Ezekiel. There was people who had other forms, people who had divine inspiration at different points, but they were people that brought over prophecy, right, at different times in history. And so 600,000 of those people were women. Now, am I saying that these numbers are 100%? Because I haven't seen it inside, right? But we do know that we had Devorah and we had different women who've had divine inspiration and did heroic things. We know Esther achieved a certain level of connection to a higher reality, right? We know Sarah had certain experiences of saying certain things. I mean, these types of things. So Rivka, Rachel, you know what I mean? So there's been moments of like tremendous elevation from women and information that came down. Now, would you say they're prophetess, this, whatever? Okay, Mark Locus, I get it. But nevertheless, this dynamic of that. So I remember hearing when I heard this, it was in yeshiva. Now, why do I remember this point? If I don't even remember exactly who said it to me, is because I had a conversation with one of my roommates, this guy Israel Tenenbaum, who also became a rabbi. I think like the last thing I heard of, he was in Baltimore, but he's really interesting story because like he was like a triplet. He had him, his brother, and a sister, kind of like a Yocheved type of situation. And so whatever. So I asked him a question because I read an article about Taylor Swift or something was on the internet. And it turns out that Taylor Swift had a bat mitzvah. Now, the thing is, she's kind of like in that reform type of logic where her dad is Jewish and her mom is not, right? So it's not such a thing, right? It's not such a thing from, I'm living in Meir Sharim at this time. I'm living on Rav Ashlag Street, if you could imagine, right? It's like, you understand, like I'm in Meir Sharim. The first street I live on, first is Base Israel, Meir Sharim. The first street I live on is called Yosef Karl, right? And just literally Yosef Karl, the writer Shulchan Aruch, that was there. And I was, my intro. And then the next place I moved to, because like it's like this whole moving thing, new. It's not normal. Like it's a whole, because it's like a university town almost, right? With all these yeshivot that are there, so it's like almost everyone's like in college, even if you're married, So I wasn't married at the time, but the point is just saying that. The point is just saying that the second street I moved to was Rav Ashlag Street, and so in Rav Ashlag Street was, both of these places that I lived in were interesting because they were what they call a dira, like an apartment, but for the Mir Yeshiva. So at Or Sameach, which was the yeshiva I was learning at the time, I was, too old to. I was there too old for nothing. But I'm saying I was older than there to live in the dorms there. It's usually for younger guys, this type of a thing. As where the Mir Yeshiva didn't have those same type of restrictions, right? And I paid for everything myself. It was like nothing was for free. Okay, I can't even tell you how much money I've spent in Israel since I've been here, right? And so anyway, so the point is just saying that when I was in both apartments were such a big transformation for me because I was coming from LA, right? I was coming from Los Angeles and, I converted, these types of things. But I mean, I'm coming in, I'm living with all these guys by the Mir Yeshiva. So the Mir Yeshiva is considered I think it's the second largest yeshiva in the world. The largest yeshiva is in actually Lakewood, New Jersey, BMG, Beis Medrash Gedolah. And it was founded by Rabbi Aaron Cutler, right? And the whole big story, him coming there, the whole thing, right? So the yeshiva, the Mir Yeshiva, which is in Jerusalem, is like the largest for sure in Israel, but it's the second largest in the world. It's like I think BMG in New Jersey has like 10,000 students or Buckram, and Mir Yeshiva has like I think 7, 8. Numbers could have changed. I don't know. I don't keep up with the statistics. But when I was there, Rabbi Nilson Finkel, he was a Rosh Yeshiva and his father. There's a whole thing, right? So the point is like this. So I was in the Mir Yeshiva, and all these guys are the top level from their communities, right? That's why they're able to be in this yeshiva. So I move in with these guys, right? So as you could, first of all, it was like a huge thing by them, right? Just to be roommates with me, they're like, wow, right? And then you have, and then vice versa, right? So when I'm living in the apartment on Yosef Karl. I mean, not Yosef. Yeah, Yosef Karl. The first one is like probably like 5 or 6 guys living in the same place. The next one I moved to was even more. It was like close to like 9 or 10 because it was a huge place, different rooms. So one of my roommates, Israel Tenenbaum, and we're sitting there, and I asked him, I said, how does the community, deal with, like, say if a girl like Taylor Swift, right? She's there, she's on stage, she makes, hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever, billions of dollars, and she's locking down stadiums, the whole thing. Like, just, I mean, you have to think the strength of such a type of person, that you're not a normal person, at that level, right? You're just not. It's a whole different mind, it's a whole different thing. So I said to her, I said, like, a girl like that with that potential, what is it like for her if she grew up in a religious community? Like, how does a religious community deal with a girl like that, right? And with that type of, power, strength. And he said, they don't. You know what I mean? They don't, right? And usually those girls are the ones that have the most problem, right? Because they have such a tremendous desire, they have such a tremendous thing in the school, and they don't, and sometimes they don't know how to deal with it in schools, and that's why you see here in Israel a lot of like girls, different people that I meet just at lectures, different places. They're like really like these kind of like, it's this whole thing in Israel where everyone's like very like into like eating healthy and clean and wellness and yoga and all this type of stuff, all this type of stuff, and they're into it here, right? And so like, I meet these girls, and a lot of times, most of these girls that are the most into it and meditation and divine femininity, all this, a lot of these girls come from extremely religious homes, and from that place, they're not getting their needs met on the basic level of understanding of Torah, right? And I'm saying the same thing by the guys, but the guys, it's not as easy to see. You know what I mean? Like the guys are, because once a guy's not connected, he's not connected. It's hard to see. But with women, they still have this sense of like some aspect of spirituality, and you're like, well, where is this coming from? So where am I going with this? So the point is saying that there's people around us that may have supernatural abilities, but because of the frame of level that we're operating as a human society, and even as a Jewish community, a lot of these people get pushed away, right? I spend a lot of time. It's an area here in Jews called Nakalot, and I spend a lot of times with these, I'm saying kids because a lot of them are younger than me, but they're doing all this like innovative stuff with like breathing and breath work and this and meditations and that, and it's such a divide between them and the religious community. And most of these kids come from religious homes, meaning that they grew up Hasidish, they grew up Litvish, Froom, the whole thing. So you see this divide that's happening, right? And you see that this new generation is not connecting to the black hat thing as much anymore, even though they come from this, right? And they love God, they love Hashem, and they want to grow higher and higher and higher. And you hear more Kabbalah and more of this, all this stuff's going on, right? So with all that going on, it made me really think about, America and American culture and African American culture and all these things. And you think about all this brilliance that has come out of, the community that I come from, the African American community. And when you think about it on a certain level, you think about like all the different people that had these supernatural gifts that the world fell in love with, right? And because we live in a culture of consumerism, a lot of times, we could have these experiences, we could have such greatness in front of us, but because we're running to the next thing, we don't even appreciate it. I've heard more jazz here in Israel than I have in my entire life, right? Because like these forms of art and these forms of creativity that come from, my ancestors, right, have left a tremendous impact all over the world. Right? I see the Ethiopians. The Ethiopians are the best example of the impact of African Americans. It's like Ethiopians come from Ethiopia, right? And many of them lived in villages. The high percentage lived in villages in Ethiopia. So coming to Israel was like a shock, right? And as they struggle to engage and to deal with bureaucracy and issues of equality, justice, all the things that any immigrant group would have in any kind of like first world society, right? Especially if you're coming from a third world country. And so, how did they do that? They accessed African American culture. When you see Ethiopians doing advocacy for themselves, they're not speaking on their people from their background. No, they're talking about Martin Luther King. They're talking about Malcolm X. They're talking about Marcus Garvey and the Black Panthers. They have courses here in Israel on the Black Panthers, right? And so this aspect of being able to look at one's culture, right? It's not limited to the African American experience. I mean, just so happens that my ancestors are the greatest content creators, in human history, right? And so what we're saying is that awakening in all of us of all of our histories, right? All of our backgrounds. Everyone has different backgrounds, whatever, and to go back and to be able to look back into those experiences of your culture and your history and say, hey, there's some sparks of holiness right there, right? So what I want to do is before we start this year, and I know I gave a big introduction, but it's important. But before we start this year, I want to just play a song that I grew up with, and it's by a famous recording artist. You guys may have heard of him. His name is Nas, and this album was called Nostradamus. Now, the thing about this album and this particular song, and the reason why I'm playing it, is because the song itself is literally prophecy. The song came out in 1999, and this was right before the whole Y2K scare, and the world was going to reset, and the whole thing, blah blah blah. So he writes a song on this album called Nostradamus, right? And I guess Nostradamus was like kind of like this guy who could kind of like predict the future, and he wrote these books, whatever. So maybe he channeled him, who knows? But he writes this song, and the song is describing a future world. And when I hear the lyrics in this song, I'm looking at things that are going on right now and personalities that are going on right now. And I'm like, wait, how did he see that 15 years ago so clearly, 16 years ago? How could he see it so clearly? And so when I listen to this, like, you know what? There's an aspect of divine inspiration in this. Like he's really he's in the ancient days they referred to him as a seer, right? And so I'm saying that to say, that obviously there's a tremendous corruption.
Chief Rabbi, it's not nothing's playing. Shalom, shalom, Chief Rabbi. There's no audio. It's frozen. Brother Moshe, can you hear me?
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Anyways, all right. So, okay, hold on. All right, perfect. Okay. All right. So, do, 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 do. Okay. So everybody can hear me now. You guys can hear me now. Everything's cool.
Yeah, yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, perfect. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's continue on. Okay. So before we go forward, is there, any thoughts or reflections on just the first part of what we started on?
No, not at all.
Okay. Cool. All right. Okay, so let's continue on. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to learn with the, as we've done before, just a little bit of it, because I really, I really want to, because we're only going to read one section of this, but this is a series of writings, and actually I'm learning with Otinel earlier. And it's a series of writings, and the writings have a lot to do with they're different responses, right? We've read different responses before that. These were much more technical than ones we read before. We read a responsa on veganism and Judaism, like that. Not that any of us are vegans, but it's just the idea of the thought that the rabbis have had throughout the ages on that issue, right? And we learned the same. We learned another responsa on preemptive war, right? I don't know if I learned that what you, but preemptive war we learned a response on, and we also learned on teaching Jews, non-Jews, teaching Torah to non-Jews, different response, right? So um, here we're learning a response from so what Rabbi Soloveitchik did, he was trying to reconcile the idea of modernism. Now, I'm not supporting modern orthodoxy. I'm not saying this is what people should do or not, but rather I'm interested in the rabbinical thought that in a rabbinical dilemma in our generation and how different rabbis see it. Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in blessed memory, he would be considered much on the modern side, right? So in his arguments about addressing these issues of modernism and Judaism, he he's going to bring Rabbi Soloveitchik, he's going to bring Rabbi Hirsch, he's going to bring other people that are like icons in that movement, and they were coming from a place of saving Judaism. Now modern Orthodox is like a form of like leniency, right? But back then, the frame of reference was saving Jews from like crazy movements that were going on that were taking Jews away from Judaism. So they didn't modernize anything, but rather they incorporated certain frames of thinking that allowed Jews that were getting seduced by these European philosophers that were in essence bringing people away from the church. That was their goal, but indirectly Jews got involved in it. So anyway, so I want to read a short part of the responsa from about Rabbi Sachs, in essence bringing Rabbi Hirsch's idea. So Rabbi Hirsch, as I think I mentioned his name to you guys before, is one of my favorite Rabbanim. And one of the first Sfarim that I ever really read cover to cover was his Sefer Horeb, right? And Horeb is a masterpiece, right? I couldn't put it down. It's originally written in German. And so Rabbi Hirsch he was a rabbi in Germany in the late 1800s. And basically when this whole ism, there's all the worlds of the isms and all these kind of like new age thinking and enlightenments that were going on in Europe in the 19th century, he was right there on that. And that's where the concept of Reform Judaism came in. So him and other rabbis, were fighting against, this reformist that wanted to fit into society and in many ways wanted to, get away from, the traditional sense of Judaism. They saw it as a hindrance to their objectives, which was, fitting into the society, in this case, German society, right? So he does it. So what we're going to do is, and the reason why we're reading it is because in order to go into the world that we've been talking about, which is the world of the neshama, right? The world of the neshama, which is like the neshama is who I am. The body and the body consciousness is secondary. The root of my existence is my neshama, is my soul. And so in order for me to connect, right? In order for me to connect to my potential, to my purpose of living, that I have to say that I'm living in this world for the sake of the correction of my soul. So earlier we were talking about this idea of downloading a different aspect, a different halic of what I received on Pesach, right? What I received on Pesach every day of the Omer, I receive an aspect of that, right? A piece of it, right? And I get more and more and more clear, right? In that same way, every single day is a mechanism to correct our soul. The day is created for the sake of the correction of the neshama, meaning from this 24-hour period, from the sun setting to the sun rising, or the sun setting to the sun setting, sorry. From that process, I'm going to be tested with so many things: success, failure, rejection, acceptance, all these things. A lot of food, no food, I'm going to be tested, right? And so from this standpoint of me being tested, right? From me being tested, then it's like, oh, okay, well, why am I being tested? Because I'm supposed to respond to life in the way that God has said that I could, or I'm supposed to, right? The way that the Torah tells us to respond to life, right? That's what every day is about. And as we respond to life in the way that the Torah and the sages have guided us, right? Thus we achieve the purpose of creation, which is the correction of the soul and the reunification of the soul in all consciousness with its maker, with the creator, right? We learned that by Rav Ashlag, right? Imagine moving to Israel, you move to Rav Ashlag Street, you're like, is Hashem speaking to me? So the point is just saying, so that is where we're at, right? But to get to that, we have to understand the world that's around us, right? Because we live in the world. Hashem created a world. Hashem created a world where it's so big and it's so powerful and it's such an impact on our five senses that we could, God forbid, Hakva Shalom, that we could actually forget about the creator. Right? What was the curse that was given to the Nachash, to the serpent, that you should eat from the dust of the ground? The sages say, why was that a curse? There's tons of dust, right? There's a ton of dust. How could that be a curse? You're not hurting me. I'm eating. I have tons of dust. It's like saying, you shall be cursed that you should only eat the best cooked foods on planet Earth. You should only have, it's like saying that, right? Would that be a curse? Would it be a curse if someone came to you and said, hey, you know what? All the best food of the world, you're going to have it endlessly. And you're never going to have to worry about it again. Endlessly. Nonstop. The thought comes to your head, the food appears. Is that a curse? So the serpent is cursed with the dust of the ground. So the sages say, why is that a curse? Because he has so much of an abundance, he can forget about Hashem. He can forget about Hashem because he has so much abundance. So what do? We live in a world that tells us that that's the goal of life, is abundance. Doesn't tell us the world goal of life is to go through the different experiences of correcting your soul. On the contrary, they came up with this idea of Christianity, and Christianity tells the human being, you're not even here to correct your soul. Someone died for your tikkuning. You don't even have a tikkun. That's when people argue with these missionaries. People just say, bro, it's no conversation. Do we have a soul or not? Do we have a soul or not? Yes or no? Okay, if I have a soul and you have a soul, what is the function of the soul? What is the function of it? Find it in your testament. Bring your scholars, your theologians, bring all of them, bring them to the table. Tell me about my soul. And if you don't have answers for that, that means your system is irrelevant to me in my life. Because the purpose of creation is the correction of the soul. When I pick up an apple, when I say Bari Prei Ha'adama, Bari Pri Ha'aretz, when I say that, I now fulfilled the purpose of creation. Because it's not about me eating the apple, it's about me connecting the pleasure and the nourishment to the apple, to the creator itself. And now the act of eating is a correction to the soul, because the soul comes into this world in a frame of sharing, and it enters the body and it goes in the frame of selfishness. But through our free will and through wisdom and through knowledge, we have the ability to go through that selfishness and reconnect ourselves to the source. And that's what life is about. So if they can't do that, bring your imam. Bring your imam, bring your holy Quran, bring it. Show me how number one, show me what the purpose of life is. And then show me how I operate within it. I understand, submit to God, one God, this, the whole thing. I'm cool with it. Great. I'm with you. Let's go. But then there's another more specific point of my spiritual journey, which is the correction of my neshama. Right? And that's why God says I should have a circumcision. Right? Because through that Brit, I make a union with creation. Right? We talked about this. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'aretz. Bara, Brit. Bereshit bara. That the Brit, the lotion of Brit. This is the what is the Brit? The heaven and the earth. This is the covenant. Now that covenant was expanded to us through Abraham. But the universe is in this frame of heaven and earth. This week's Torah portion is about Shemitah, right? The whole concept of Shemitah, right? And the Lubavitch Rebbe, he talks about this whole thing about why does the Torah have to go into Shemitah? How is Shemitah the cornerstone of understanding, the efforts of Am Israel, the whole thing? How do we understand it? So anyways, Bekitzer, the point is saying that the whole purpose is for us to bring the heaven and the earth together. This is our job in this world. And so all these other spiritual systems and all these other new age ideas, like I told you, like I know all these girls, they're like health this and natural wheat and natural ice cream and this and harmonies and meditation and tambourines and guitars and candles lit all over the place. Okay, very nice. Wow. I feel, wow, the incense. Was it incense or marijuana? I don't know. But the point is that, I feel enchanted. I'm enchanted in this. But how does this connect? Where's the emphasis on the neshama? This is a nice experience, but what about tomorrow when I'm faced with this and that and this and all these other things? How do I interpret that reality? Do I see it in the frame of Etz Chaim or in the frame of Eitz Das? Right? Eitz Das is good and bad. Some days are good, some days are bad, some things are for me, some things are bad. Etz Chaim is everything is for me. Hashem says only eat from that tree. Everything is for me. Everything is success. I'm going through pain right now. You want to hear a crazy story? So yesterday, I go and we're about to go into Rabbi. But yesterday I went to a meeting, right? It was with a very big publication here in Israel, probably the biggest. And I'm going to these publications. I'm meeting with the, senior executives, and I'm presenting this model of this mechanism of this African American rabbi who responds to the Candace Owens, who responds to the white liberals, who responds to the Kanye Wests, who responds to all these things. And in the same way how the Christians have their people and the Muslims, all this, we don't have those Jewish type personalities. It's right there. So I'm having those meetings, right, with the editors of the main publications in the world right now. Right? Those are the conversations I'm having. And so this one meeting I went to yesterday, the senior editor, he's a legend here in Israel, by the way. He's like a huge journalist, but he's the senior editor. I don't want to say the publication's name, but the point that I'm doing there's going to be a whole big article coming out. I'm doing whatever. So the point is just saying that I go to the meeting, and he's not there. I'm waiting there. People walking in the office. Some people even notice me. They're like, "Yeah," I say, "Yeah, I'm waiting for so and so." And then I'm like, I got there early. I'm pumped up. I was going to go to a birthday party the night before, but I said, hey, you know what? I got to go to this meeting. I don't, I want to be totally clear, energy. And so, long story short, I go. He doesn't show up, right? And I'm in his office waiting for him, right? So I text him. I'm like, yeah, I'm in the because I'm thinking maybe he's upstairs, right? Because there's like a double floor type. They have the studio upstairs, and so. Anyways, long story short, he says, "Oh my God, I totally forgot I was doing this. Blah blah blah. I'm over here on the street. I'm in Emek Rephaim, which isn't that far away from where I was at. It's probably like 15-minute bus ride or something like this." And so I'm like, "Oh my God!" I'm like, you can imagine I'm a little bit like bothered by the whole thing. What do you mean this? This whole thing. I didn't say that to him, but I'm just like, all right, fine. So I go. I find a bus. I get over there. I meet with him, and he was like so incredibly apologetic, right? And it was really, I even take the accountability because I should have, confirmed with him, we talked on Thursday, and today's Sunday, right? I mean, for me, it's such a huge meeting. Like I'm just like, ready to go. For him, it's like, okay, I have a meeting at 10. I have a meeting at this time. So anyway, so I go to meet with him. He's so apologetic. He just starts throwing everything. Like, oh, I want to do this. We could do this. And he's the guy. You know what I'm saying? He was like the main guy at Jerusalem Post, and now he's at this other competing publication. And so he's just like, we could do this. So it worked out miraculously, right? But in the beginning, it wasn't that way, right? It wasn't that way. I was disappointed. I felt like maybe if I was more famous, this, blah blah blah. Satan starts having all these ideas. But when I was sitting at the bus stop after the meeting, and it was so incredibly progressive, and after the meeting, I was there, and I thought about the Torah by Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Chief Jonathan Sachs, blessed memory. And he gave the example of the end of the book of Exodus, right? Ending with this idea of building the Mishkan, right? And the beginning of the book of Exodus is God creating this world, right? So he parallels the fact that in the beginning of creation, God created the God created the world, right? God created the world, and he dwelt in the world, right? God dwelled in the world, right? We created the world, the whole thing, and then God's presence dwelled in the world, right? God finished, right? Leah Sod, it was done, right? And so this idea of those two parallels are also connected to something inside, right? Because in Bereshit, he says the second pasuk is Ve'ha'aretz hayata tohu ve'choshek. So in the beginning, the world was dark and it was full of tohu vuhu, chaos, the whole thing. And then the next verse is Vayomer Elohim ve'yahi or ve'yahi or, right? So in God said, "Let there be light and light." So those are parallel experiences. This is how the world is structured. That God introduces us to reality by explaining to us about the heavens and the earth, but then he next explains to us about this reality of darkness and tohu and vuhu, and then the next process right after that, the third verse, is telling us about the light. And so Rabbi Sachs, what he does is he takes that idea and he helps us understand the process of Har Sinai and the relationship to the Mishkan. Moshe is on Har Sinai and he comes down, and what happens? There's a golden calf, right? So when he's up there receiving this revelation directly from God, there's tohu vuhu, there's chaos, there's darkness happening. So he comes down to that reality after achieving a tremendous height, right? No human in history has ever, no human in history has ever achieved that level, right? That no human in human history has ever achieved that level of that closeness to Hashem, right? So we said the beginning of creation starts with what? It starts with this idea of, in the second verse, Veha'aretz hayatato vuhu vechoshek, right? This idea of complete darkness. Second verse is Vayomer Elohim ve'ahir ve'hir. And God said, let there be light. So this is a process that there's darkness and then comes the light. And so Rabbi Jonathan Sachs brings this concept, right? He brings this concept of the building of the egel, right? Being this idea of tohu vuhu, the idea of complete chaos and insanity and disconnection and all this in the choshek, in the darkness. And then that was the precursor to the building of the Mishkan. The same way that the people gathered for the sin of the egel, Moshe had to gather them for the mitzvah. And so what we're saying is there's two realities. There's tohu, there's a reality of Eitz Hadas, good and bad, and then there's a reality of Etz Chaim, right? We can't get past that. Because if we're in the consciousness of Etz Chaim, if we're in that reality, then that means everything is in my favor. So when Moshe's coming down in the frame of Etz Chaim, he's saying that this whole process of them building the gate, the egel, was a precursor to them building the Mishkan. He saw that, so he had to repair them. He had to go step by step, and everything they did in Avera, he had the same way they gathered, he had to gather them for Kedusha. The same way that they collected for the egel, he had to collect for the Mishkan. You understand? So this whole process. Go ahead.
Not to interrupt. I have a question, just so I can make sure that I'm in the right framework. Okay, so even like when we talk about the individuals, the young ladies, and also going back to the prophets, and how everyone is like expressing themselves in different ways, and a lot of them come from religious families and whatnot. And then even up to this point here, can we look at it from the standpoint of that Hashem, when he saw darkness and everything looked, that darkness seemed to be chaotic, not orderly, not normal, and also his Moshe Rabbeinu gathering Israel together, and Israel coming out of slavery, and the mindset is that they, coming out a chaotic people, but there's two elements to actually see here, to where it's like, if we look at Israel and say, you know what, Israel exemplified a high level of stiff-neckedness, right? But then on the back end of that, if we were to put that same energy of stiff-neckedness in the right vessel, it would, instead of it being manifested as stiff-neckedness, it would be faith. It would be unshakable faith. It would be, it's about the vessel, not so much, it's about the light, but that the vessel has to be corrected, because that same energy that's coming in like for example, you brought up Taylor Swift. Okay, here she is. She's a vessel, but that vessel, it has to be correct. It has to be corrected. But the energy that we're seeing be manifested, we're actually seeing a what would be a great light of gathering people and getting people's attention, you know. But if the vessel becomes corrected, that same energy of being able to pack those type of stadiums would be used for Hashem. That it would be used in that way. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, and it's not, and I think the key is the idea is purification of the vessel, right? Because the light always wants to come, right? We learned Rabbi Cook, right? He said the soul is always davening, right? The soul always wants to be close to Hashem. The soul always wants to be, but it's constricted in this body consciousness, right? And this body consciousness makes it leave. So we want to purify the body. That's why we're always learning about our behavior, our midot, right? Because the more we cleanse ourselves, the more the presence of God. But the thing is, it's not to look at Taylor Swift just in that way. Look at everyone that you see in your life. And what would they be doing if they had their vessel, if they knew that they had a vessel to do what they were doing in a way to serve God? Taylor Swift is just easy because she's famous, right? But what about the guy who's an accountant? What about the guy who's a banker? What about the guy who's a rapper? What about the guy who's a surfer? What about the person who's teaching? Like, I mean, no diss. I'm not dissing anybody, okay? But my younger sister, she's a professor, right? But she teaches philosophy. Okay, very good. Me personally, I cannot use my intelligence to teach that stuff all day. As much as people want to learn about it, and it's interesting, and maybe there's some good lessons, whatever, but I cannot use my mind to teach some wisdom that has nothing to do with correction of the soul. And if anything, it's a distraction towards it. But what could she be doing if she focused herself on just only bringing the life force of the Creator into the world? What institutions would she create? Now she may get there. You know, she and her husband, you know, follow the Torah, right? They follow the Torah, right? And they have a home, a kosher home, right? So she's building that. But the point is saying we got to look at the whole world that way because this is the revolution. The revolution is we have not been living as ourselves. We have been living as caterpillars. The whole planet Earth has been living like caterpillars. Now it's time to become butterflies. Now it's time to break out of that cocoon, right? And that, because we've all been living that way. I could not be talking to you right now. You don't think I could sell you a used car? You don't think I could sell you a company? I could break down the different parts of the company, the assets. I can't sell them to you for 3 times the amount. You don't think I could use my ability to go out and convince a bunch of women to do I mean, come on. I made it because I'm here, because I'm teaching Torah. I made it. My mouth made it. My tongue made it. My lungs made it. My brain, my machshava, my everything about me made it because of that. Now, how far we go with it, that's what we have to wait and see. But all of us, and even here, I got to grow. Even here, I don't, I got to have children and this, be a father, all these other elements. So I'm still growing, right? I'm still growing. Nevertheless, I'm not stuck in that illusionary world where I'm gauging my life on the amount of profit that I'm making. That I'm gauging my life on the amount of status that I create. I mean, yeah, great. I mean, I'm in the magazine, I'm in the newspaper, this whole thing. Okay, fine. But who really cares? You know what I'm saying? You know who they care about? They care about Puffy and his degeneracy. That's who the world cares about. It's a funny story. It's a guy, Reginald Lewis, and he's one of the first famous black billionaires or whatever. And he did it with this country called Beatrice Foods. I mentioned this. This is one of the first books I read when I was a kid. My dad gave it to me. And something. He said, I think the book was like "White Guys Don't Have All the Fun" or something. It was something like this. I don't know. But he bought Beatrice Foods. It was like a food production company. I think they made a lot of baby food, other product, food services, whatever. He bought the companies, this, whatever. He became a billionaire. This is like in the 80s, right? So he said in his book, and I never forget this. He says, yeah, I became a billionaire and I bought this company, and it's historically from a black perspective, it's great, all these different things. He said, however, if I would have bought Paramount Studios, which was even less than the company, I think it was like 300, $400 million less than what he got this company for. He said, if I would have got this company, it would be on every front page, in the world, right? And so even though, yes, I'm doing the things that I'm doing and I'm proud of it, and I will scream and yell how thankful I am to Hashem to be where I'm at, in the world that we live in, the world that denies its soul, the world that does not have a basis of who they are, what I'm doing is like it's like a Jewish like pope or priest, or you know what I mean? It's like it's in that realm. You're like a spiritual leader. Okay, very nice, shkoyek, very good, nice. But the point is saying that nobody cares, right? I'm doing this year, maybe 40, 50 people here, type of a thing. God willing, in the future there'll be so many more if that's what Hashem wants. But the point is just saying it's not. I'm coming from LA. I'm coming from Hollywood. You know what I'm saying? So it's like it's this isn't about that. You got something to say on it? Anyways, so the point is just saying so that dynamic is not that, right. So what we're gonna do now, I think we're gonna skip Rabbi Sachs, because I mean I don't want to. Oh, well, maybe we should do that. Maybe we should just do that. We got to do one or the other, right? Because we can't do both in this class. It'd be way too long. Okay, so let's just so we're on the same page. Let's learn a little bit of Chief Lord Jonathan Rabbi Sachs in this responsa, right? And why do we learn responses, right? Because the mechanism of responses, right, is number one, to develop a rabbinical mind, right? Because what's the difference between a rabbi versus a person who is knowledgeable in your community, right? A person who's knowledgeable in your community, you say, hey, what's the halakha about this? You don't need to go necessarily to a rabbi and ask them, what's the halakha for this on Shabbat? Or what's the halakha? Obviously you want someone you trust or whatever, but there's not a lot of people, especially here in Israel, that are not rabbanim, that don't have smichot or anything like that, and are very knowledgeable, right? So, so I would argue that knowing halakha, knowing shulchan doesn't make a person a rabbi. But what makes a person a rabbi is that when they're able to apply the Shulchan Aruch and these different elements to everyday life, right? When they could apply it to everyday life, when they could see the world and say, okay, hey, this is what we should do, or you shouldn't do this, or maybe you should really rethink this, and then look at it through rabbinical lenses, right? And the way that I was taught, at least, to train myself to do that is by reading responses, right? That's one of the big things, in yeshiva at a certain level, is when people start to learn halacha, especially in Kollel, that's a big point, is looking at different responsot from different Rabbanim throughout history. Like if you're in America, a lot of people learn Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who's like the main, posek, in North America. But there was other Rabbanim, right? And had different positions. So this particular conversation is a conversation about modernity, right, of Judaism, right, and how Jews are dealing with that. Now, again, I am not co-signing modern thought, right? I would actually maybe even speak against a lot of modern thought. My thought process is much more yeshivish and much more in a frame of Haredi in a lot of ways. And I can even say I've grown a lot to even say, could call myself even a religious, Zionist in a lot of ways, meaning that, we want the state to improve, right? We want the state to become more religious. We want the ideas of the state to be more religious. We want the religious values to be more. So that's what you see today in Israel is the country going in that direction. And that's why there's so much opposition against Netanyahu. It's not so much just, people don't like, it's not so much that people, don't like Bibi. You know what I'm saying? It's not so much that. It's the fact that, here in Israel, the religious right is having a lot of success, right? And meaning that, like, dealing with this issue with Hamas, right? This concept of dealing with Hamas is not just the issue of the hostages; it's the fact that the Jews are showing the country is showing strength, right? And the strength is coming from a right wing government. It's not just the strength of going into Gaza and the West Bank, but it's also the strength of the Minister of Security, Ben Gvir, right? And how, like, what you saw with the whole thing on the Temple Mount and all those things, that's from him, right? He's the one who's pushing that agenda, that idea. I'm not saying I agree with all of his politics or the Kohanis politics and all these other things. I'm not into it in that way, but I am going to say that these social reforms that, whether we can argue about the Holocaust of the Harbayit and how to deal with it or whatnot, okay, fine. But nevertheless, the point is saying that Jewish presence is still a thing. If you're saying they should be, so many meters back and this and on this part, okay, fine, whatever. But the bottom line is that is something that the country wants, right? The country wants to be on the Harabite, or a large percent. And I'm talking, when I say the country, the religious people of the country. And when I say religious, I'm saying people who are more Sioni, people who are religious Zionists, or Haredi. I'm not saying this by them, but eventually even them, because there's Haredim that are doing it now. They're just not public about it. There's Haredi rabbis that are on the Temple Mount. I see them. They ask for their pictures to not be taken and these types of things. So the point is saying that the points that we're saying is that, going forward, with with everything let's just go for it. So anyway, so what we're doing is we're going to learn a little bit of this responsa, and this responsa, is Rabbi Hirsch, actually, and this is an introduction to Rabbi Hirsch, and this is by Chief Jonathan Rabbi Sachs. And again, I'm not endorsing modernism. I'm just saying this is what the rabbis and their dilemmas at different times in history had to deal with. And this particular responsa that we're going to do just an introduction on, this particular responsa is this particular responsa is by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, and it's conditional coexistence. Okay, so this is how Rabbi Sachs opens up this. Chief Rabbi Sachs, blessed memory, should be with us. This is how he opens up. This is how he opens up this discussion. Sorry, I got to keep clicking on. All right, so this is how he opens up this discussion. Okay, so he says it. Hold on, let's go into it. All right. Okay, so he says like this. He said, Moshe, confronted with his mission, asked, "Who am I?" Right? Moshe, God comes to him and says, "You're the Redeemer. You're the Mashiach for your generation." And he says, "Who am I? I'm not that guy." He says the modern Jew uses the same words but asks a different question. For Moses, the doubt was his personal worthiness. For the modern Jew, the doubt is about personal identity. Whoever was fragile about the prime modern Jewish existence, religious self-definition was not that. So he's saying before this whole thing of modernization and the growth of this kind of like new, like modern culture that we live in today, fused by technology and all these things, he's saying what a Jewish identity was never ever in question. That you never saw that. And so he says, he said the Jew, he says whoever, he says whatever else was fragile about pre-modern Jewish existence, like whatever, there were issues with, because there were issues. He says the identity was not, self-definition was not. The Jew, he says the Jew had his selfhood established by the community in which he lived, fleshed out by the norms and the practices and the beliefs in which he moved. He said conformed by Christian or Muslim culture, which was the surrounding. So back then, when Jews were treated like Jews, right, in the harshest sense, meaning when Jews were in Europe, they had to live in shtetls, they lived in ghettos, right? So it wasn't a question if I'm a Jew or not. Everywhere you went, I'm a Jew. I lived in this community. I wasn't allowed to live other places. If I was, I'll be punished. Same thing in the Middle East, right? Jews were there and they lived amongst the Muslims, and they got to pay a tax. They called it Jezua, right? And they had to pay a tax, and they had to do certain things. They weren't allowed to ride horses and all types of crazy things, but anything that showed Jewish power, They were not allowed to do. But nevertheless, the people, because of this, knew that they were Jewish. He says the pre-modern literature asked the question about faith and reason and history. So before, during these times of the ghettos and the shtetls and the times of the mullahs and all these things, it's crazy. Hold on, people keep coming in and out of the room, so that's stuff. All right, so hold on 1 second. Maybe I should make someone else a co-mod. Okay, so all right. So during the times of when the Jews lived in shtetls, or when they lived in the Middle East and they lived in, under the rulership of the mullahs or sultans, or even in Spain, when they were subjugated by Christianity, he says, but the Jews knew that they were Jews. Right? They had other things. He says the pre-modern literature, if you look at all the literature before modern times, he says, ask the questions about Amunah, about Bitakon, about history, about destiny, about the mind, about the cosmos, but not about what it is to be a Jew, because that was formed by the cultures that they lived in. He says modernity, he says, thus forced upon the Jew to question of identity, and in particular in terms of their relationship to secular culture and citizenship. He says the orthodoxy, which maintained a sense of unbroken community with Judaism, of the Talmudic age and the Torah of Moshe, was the least inclined of any of the Jewish responses in the 19th century to see the need for redefinition. He said it wasn't a thing. But no thinkers could fail to see that the context of Jewish existence had radically changed, even if its content remained the same. He says orthodoxy developed on its own responses to modernity. And in his study to examine, in this study, we examined 4 of them. He says of those is Samson Raphael Hirsch. So right now he's saying, so he said that there were orthodoxy that responded to all this modernity, right? So one person he's going to bring is Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who I spoke about earlier. He's also going to bring Avraham Yitzhak Cook, Rabbi Cook, which we learned. We learned Rabbi Cook's essay on prayer, right? And then he's going to bring Rabbi Soloveitchik, right? Yosef Soloveitchik, which is a humongous person. YU University, was created, right? And his merit, right, was Rav Soloveitchik, YU University, right? Yeshiva University, and then you have Moshe Shofar, right? He says, seen schematically as alternative models rather than as individuals set in unique social and historical circumstances. And as they map out the broad range of options available to Orthodoxy in the age of unsympathetic to its commitments, analyzing their impacts, we arrive at a paradoxical conclusion. But first, what are the problems they confronted? Right, so he's bringing these set of rabbis. So Rabbi Hirsch was in Europe, right? He was in Europe when the whole reform movement happened, and he was fighting against it like vehemently. And then he brings Rabbi Cook, right? So Rabbi Cook, he brings Rabbi Cook, and Rabbi Cook was the first chief Ashkenaz rabbi of Israel, and I think in the 1920s, right, before the state was even established. And then you have Rav Soloveitchik, who will be considered Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' contemporary, right? And these types of things. So we're going to learn their responses of that. But he said before we could get into their particular responses, we have to understand what were they up against. So he was into secularization, right? So secularization, he said, was the first process which threatened to marginalize all religious systems. Secularism. Right? He says secularism. Secularization. Sorry, secularization. By this is generally meant the transfer of territory, property, and more generally society's institutions and culture from to an enthusiastic or to lay power. He says modernity is the mark by which the fact that religion ceased to dominate the way society organizes itself. right? So this idea of modernity, this modernization in Western and even the society in the world was something that wanted to change the structure, right? This trains the subject, this eclectic, enthusiastic, mechanism, and it wanted to change the social structure. How? Modernity is marked by the fact that religion ceased to dominate the way society organizes itself or the way individuals explain their decisions. Rational methods of scientific inquiry in bureaucratic organizations of state and large organizations, the transformation of ethics, of code, of duty, of a system of producing beneficial results. Okay, so he's saying like this. We went from a world where you would go to the wise man of your community, right? You would go to the wise man of your community, and then from there, you would understand whatever the dilemma that you were dealing with. Modernity says, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to change the social structure and we're going to divide it into parts. You're going to have a public sector, which is the government. You're going to have the civic sector, which is schools and the civic living and the nonprofits and all these different things that serve the society. And then you're going to have the private sector, which is privately owned business. And so that society within it, there's subdivisions in all those things, right? And so the government meets certain needs, the civic sector meets certain needs, and then the private sector meets certain needs because capitalism became the mechanism. And so now this new approach to society, which is called modernism, right? This new approach to society, now the religious world now has to deal with that. Like, whoa, you want us to leave the shtetl? You want us to join German society? I thought we were the Jews you didn't want. Now you want us to join you? Now you want us to leave the villages of Esfahan and Tehran, I mean, in Iran, and now you want us to rule and be Tehranis? You want us to be modern? You want us to be more this? You want us to be citizens? Right? He says probably the first time in history the religious legitimacy of the world have lost its plausibility not only for a few intellects and other marginal individuals, but for the broad masses of society. So religion being the central point. Now, when we go back to, we talked about the European philosophers, right? Like Immanuel Kant and these people, that was their whole idea against the church. They wanted to modernize European society. And so they saw the church as a problem for that. They wanted to make the citizen the quintessential part of society and not the religious leader, not the priest, not the pope, not the cardinal. They wanted to change that mechanism. It's kind of like in Black history in America, it used to be, the preacher, the reverend. He was the person who influenced politics and what people did. Now they got it to the rapper. Now you got Cardi B, she's out there telling you who to vote for. I don't know if she's ever voted, right? Her moral thing is not there. But the point is the same. So this was a shift in society. They wanted to move it, and now it's progressed even past that, and now we glorify the businessman, right? So this will do it. So now he brings a guy, he brings a Peter Berger. He says, and we're only going to read a little bit more of this. He says, Peter Berger, in his classic study of secularism, notes that this does not constitute a terminal threat to the organized religion. He says, this system, this modernization he holds, right? We're going to understand because this is the responses. So we got to hear the arguments and then we have to unpack them, right? Because again, it's not just being able to answer a halakhic response or having deep ideas or whatever, but it's about being able to see the history of decision making as it relates to the collective, whether we agree with it or not, right? And so that's why we learn responses. We learn responses in yeshiva. We learn halakha in depth. We learn musar in depth. We learn Kabbalah. We learn the Zohar. We learn other texts. We learn the Torah. Right? I went straight to the tour and we given shir on the tour itself, not Beis Yosef. not the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, we got there, but to understand what the Shulchan Aruch is, what the Torah is, I mean, what the Beis Yosef was trying to accomplish in his Sefer, right? What the Beis Yosef was trying to accomplish Sefer can only be understood if you learn the Torah. And you can say, oh, okay, by this, now I understand, right? And so, we're learning Shari Kedusha. Wait, why? But we're not just learning Shari Kedusha by itself. We're learning it in conjunction with Ramchal, Path of the Just, because Ramchal was trying to write like Chaim Vital. He took the same exact structure, right? And we learned Rabbi Kook, right? Rabbi Kook is he's teaching, he's speaking in the language of the Tikkuni Zohar, right? So we're connecting these dots. So we're learning these responses. So what is he saying? Peter Berger, in the classic study of secularism, notes that this isn't the process. He said, you don't have to worry about it wiping out religion. He said, on the contrary, modernization, on the contrary, the expectations of the more radical figures of the Enlightenment, religion has proved surprisingly it's working in conjunction. I'm using a different word. It works well in the modern world, right? The enlightenment of religion proves to do this. He says, what does it mean? What does this mean? He says, however, it is relocation of religious dogma. He said, where in the pre-religious modern world, he says individuals found his religion meaning embedded in the vision of the society, the cosmos, and in secular society, right? This is before. But now he's saying like this, in a modern society, religion manifests itself in particularities, modern form. That is, legitimizing complex voluntary adoption by an uncoerced consentile, right? And he says, as such, it is located in the private sphere of everyday social life and is marked by the very particular traits of this sphere in modern society. So he's saying like this, his argument, this particular person, again, he's bringing people not as proofs, but rather so we can understand the conditions, right? We have to look at it completely objective, not from the standpoint of this, right? We're going to read one point and we're going to stop here. And like I said last night, I wanted to come back, right? I have another meeting tonight, right? But this time we're going to make a super effort, even if it's short, because I really want to finish this. And I really, I told Otina we want to finish at least his first response, right? From Rabbi Hurst's perspective. So he says like this. He says, in such a location in the private sphere of everyday social life, and it is marked by a very particular trait of its sphere in modern society. He says, one of the essential traits of this individualism is this means that the privatized religion is a matter of choice or preference. So now he's saying that in these modern societies, the force of the community is not on the people, but rather the people have the ability to choose how they want to hold. Now you see the invention of reform culture. And so he says the choice and preference of the individual or nuclear family de facto lacking in common binding qualities. Such private religiosity, however real it may be to the individual who adopts it, can no longer fulfill the classic task of religion, that of constructing a common world within which all societies live, ultimately meaning binding on everyone, right? So let's stop here. So it's a lot more to this, but this is extremely important, right? Yeah. So anyways, so the point is just saying that the modernization, right, of society is the conflict of what we saw with religion in the beginning of the 19th century. And this is important because when we understand it and we learn it out, now we can see why we live in a world today that denies the spirituality and the soul of a human being. because the idea, like when you look at the idea of the separation of church and state in the United States, right? The separation of church and state in the United States had to do with the fact that the American government should not exclusively promote any particular religion or hold or establish itself in the frame of any religion, right? But the founding fathers wanted God to be a part of the system. The growth of America is its morality, is its kind of like virtuous element within corruption, right? We had slavery, we had all these things, but within corruption, it was still this striving for virtue, right? And so, what the point is, what we're saying is that when we learn the Tanya, when we learn all these texts and we hear about the neshama and the soul and this, and it's going to sound foreign to 99% of the people you're going to speak to. Why? Because why? Because we live in an institutional world that cannot justify teaching spirituality to its citizens. Because they say, well, that will allow you to now be in a frame where now you could say that the government is in conjunction with a particular government or a particular set of ideas. And that is not the virtues of the country, which, you could argue that. But nevertheless, we have to understand that the reality that we live in is a world that's completely separated from the neshama. And much of that understanding even affects the religion that we learn today. The way it's presented, right? It's presented in ways that is devoid of the neshama. That's why you can have Jewish groups that say, hey, you don't need to follow the Torah. It's just tradition. No, this isn't tradition. This is my soul. This is how I'm. This is how I'm. This is how I'm functioning in the world. This is how I. This is the purpose of creation. It's not just a tradition, right? And so that's that. We have to do. So I want to finish this at least in 2 hours from now. I see you the link. God willing, I'm focused. I'm focused. God willing, I have the strength to push forward. But we got. I want to finish this because we have to be so clear on the world that we're living in and the rules that the world was developed with, and we can see how far they are away from God's will, from the will of Hashem, from the will of the purpose of the Jewish people, and why we have so much